and is determined to put forward a vision for a better future. What a contrast this is with the Conservatives, who are completely out of touch with people's concerns, but also say this is as good as it gets and stoops to a smearing, negative, contradictory campaign. So basically, we will be putting forward our manifesto, and what has been remarkable is that as leader of the opposition, Ed Miliband has shaped the political agenda and made the political weather. And with his determination, and with our absolute determination and backing of all of us here and all the Labour supporters all around the country, we are determined to make Ed Miliband the next Prime Minister of this country. And I'm now going to introduce a short film.
Have you ever seen a more incompetent, hopeless, out of touch, U-turning, pledge-breaking, make it up as you go along, back of the envelope, miserable shower than this Prime Minister and this government? Friends, it falls to us. It falls to us, the Labour Party, as it has fallen to previous generations of Labour Party pioneers. Never to shrug our shoulders at injustice, to come together, to join together, to work together, one nation, a country for all.
Ed Miliband has called for the breakup of Rupert Murdoch's UK media empire.
If you're going to declare an intent to stand up, you're going to get attacked by powerful people who oppose change.
Our integrated plan for physical health, mental health and care for the elderly. 3,000 more midwives, 5,000 more care workers, 8,000 more GPs and 20,000 more nurses. An NHS with time to care.
We need a reckoning with our banks, not for retribution, but for reform, to tackle the cost of living crisis in this country.
When most people think it can't be changed or it just isn't going to happen, he never ever gives up.
Friends, let's fight for a fairer, more just, more equal Britain. That's what I'm going to do. That's what you do day in, day out. That's what every person in this party must do. That's the way we're going to win this fight. That's the way we're going to win this general election.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the leader of the Labour Party and the next Prime Minister, Ed Miliband.
Thank you very much, friends. Thank you very much, friends. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Friends, thank you so much for that incredibly kind welcome. And can I say it is great to be here with you today. Today I present our plan for the working people of our country. On behalf of all of you in our party who have contributed to it, and on behalf of all of you in our country who have inspired it. And my case is simple. Britain can be better. Britain can be better for you, your family, and our country. And as I propose this change, I'm guided by one simple truth. It's only when working people succeed that Britain succeeds. Because you see, I believe that the wealth, the success, the future of our country does not simply come from a few at the top. It comes from every working person in our country. And I'm not going to pretend to you today that building this country will be instant or easy. It has demanded change from us. It will require change in the way the country is run. And seeing it through demands new and different leadership. But today I want to tell you how we can make it happen. Today I want to tell you why Britain needs a Labour government. Now, the very start of our manifesto is different to those that have gone before. It doesn't do what most manifestos do. It doesn't offer a list of promises, a shopping list of proposals. Instead, it seeks to answer the questions you're asking. I know many people want a fairer Britain, but they ask whether it's possible. You want to see your children have a better tomorrow, but ask how we can pay for it today. You want Labour values and a new start, but you ask whether we can be responsible with our nation's finances. This plan shows there is no trade-off between being disciplined and making a difference. The plan we lay before you is no less ambitious because we live in a time of scarcity. It is more ambitious because it starts from a clear commitment to balance the books and because it does not stop there. This is a plan to change our country. And it is a plan which shows Labour is not only the party of change, but the party of responsibility too. So page 1, line 1 sets out Labour's budget responsibility commitment. A clear vow to protect our nation's finances. A triple lock of responsibility. First, we're the only party at this election which can show how every policy in our manifesto will be paid for. No commitments requiring additional borrowing, not a single one. This is the first lock. Second, our manifesto writes the first line of Labour's first budget. This budget cuts the deficit every year. And that budget will only be presented when that has been verified by the Office of Budget Responsibility. That is the second lock. Third, the next Labour government will meet our fiscal rules, with the national debt falling and a surplus on the current budget. A triple lock. My vow to you, the British people, everything in this manifesto is funded. The deficit will be cut every year. The books will be balanced and the national debt will be falling. Today, I tell you how we can deliver, and I offer our manifesto as proof. A better plan for a better future for our country. Now, this commitment to fiscal responsibility is the foundation. And what a contrast with the Conservatives. In recent days, you've seen them throwing spending promises around with absolutely no idea where the money is coming from. Promises which are unfunded, unfair, and unbelievable. That approach is bad for the nation's books. And you know, nothing is more dangerous to our NHS than pretending you'll be able to protect it without being able to say where the money is coming from. You can't fund the NHS with an IOU, and the Conservative Party need to learn that lesson. Because this is the road that leads only to broken promises and working people paying the price, with higher taxes and public services undermined. The Tories are the party of sums that do not add up and commitments that will not be kept. We are a party that will keep our commitments, and every promise we make is paid for. That is the difference between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. But you know, we don't pursue this responsibility for its own sake. It's the essential, strong foundation on which we build. Because I tell you plainly today, we have to change the way this country is run and who it is run for. Because for too long, the British people have been told something that just isn't true. That what's good for the richest and most powerful is always good for the whole of our country. That as long as a few individuals and companies are okay, we can just wait for the wealth to trickle down to everybody else, with one rule for the few and another rule for the many. And what does it mean under this government? Insecurity for millions as the prescription for economic success. Everyday people having to pay the price of hard times. Young people fated to have a worse life than their parents, and public services cut back to the core. We've had 5 years of these ideas. We've had 5 years of this experiment, and it has failed. So today we tear up the old assumptions. Britain succeeds not when we only reward those with the six-figure bonuses, but when we reward the hard work of every working person in our country. Britain succeeds not when our schools and hospitals are cut back to the bone, but when we invest so they can strive to be the best in the world. Britain succeeds not with communities that are fraying at the edges, but when we have communities where people share a common life. Britain succeeds not when those who have the access and the wealth have all the power, but when everyone's voice is heard. And Britain succeeds not when we turn in on ourselves, but when we are strong and confident and look outward to the world. That is the kind of country we are. That's how Britain can be better than this. And it all begins with our economy. You see, we believe the success of our nation will be built on the success of working people. So with our plan, everyone who puts in will get to share fairly in our prosperity as a country. See, the Tories would have you believe that low pay is necessary for Britain to succeed. Friends, that is wrong. Low pay and insecurity stop us succeeding. They hold back working people and hold back our country. So we will set new ambitions for the minimum wage. A minimum wage by 2019 reaching its highest ever proportion of average earnings, rising to more than £8 an hour. So hard work pays again in our country. And we write the next chapter in the fight to end low pay. And as we tackle low pay, so too insecurity. This government has overseen an epidemic of insecurity with 0 hours contracts. I tell you, a text message at 6 a.m. telling you if you have work that day is no basis for building a modern economy. And our plan will have a simple principle at its heart. We will legislate so everyone who works regular hours will get a regular contract, not a 0 hours contract. And that is just the beginning of our plan for family finances. For the 4.5 million people on tax credits, we pledge today to protect them, not cut them, as the Tories have said they would. For working parents, we will not just have 25 hours free nursery care for 3- and 4-year-olds, but we will go further. The next Labour government will introduce a new national childcare service to work with primary schools, to help guarantee that wraparound childcare that should be there for every working parent that wants it. And we will seek to bear down on all the costs working people face, showing how we can freeze rail fares in the first year of a Labour government and do it in a properly funded way. And I make this promise to working families today as well. We will not raise national insurance or VAT, or the basic or higher rates of income tax. So my pledge for your family finances, an £8 minimum wage, exploitative 0 hours contracts banned, tax credits protected, childcare extended, no rise in VAT, national insurance, or the basic and higher rate of income tax, because this party is determined to raise the living standards of working people in our country. And the reason we can make these commitments, is because we will make sure that those with the broadest shoulders bear the greatest burden. So we'll reverse David Cameron's tax cut for millionaires to help pay down the deficit. We'll crack down on the hedge funds who avoid paying their fair share. We'll stop HMRC operating double standards. We'll call the tax havens to account. And we'll do something that no government has done for over 200 years. We'll say enough is enough to the people who live here, work here, send their kids to school here, but don't want to pay taxes here like everyone else, and we will abolish the non-dom rule. And it's not just on tax, where we'll end the old idea that there's one rule for the rich and powerful and another rule for everyone else. The next Labour government will help create the conditions for wealth creation in everything we do. That means being pro-business, but not pro-business as usual. You can't have banks that are so powerful that they can have things all their own way. That's what we learned from the financial crisis. So with our plan, we'll set a threshold for the market share of the banks, get real competition on our high street, and not have businesses serving our banks, but banks serving our businesses once again. And we won't stand by while powerful energy companies rip off businesses and families, keeping prices too high. So our plan will freeze energy bills so they can only fall and cannot rise, and give the regulator the power to cut prices this winter. Pro-business, but not pro-business as usual. And while we maintain a competitive tax regime for large firms, we will champion small and medium-sized firms and cut and freeze business rates for 1.5 million companies. And the reason we'll do it, is because small and medium-sized businesses will create so much of the profits, wealth, and jobs of the future. And here's the thing. You have to ask, who do you want in power when it comes to these big decisions? When the knock at the door comes from the big 6 energy companies? When the banks send a message asking for a better deal for them? When the tax avoiders turn up demanding that the revenue turns the other way? Or when the phone call comes from Rupert Murdoch? Who do you want in Downing Street? Who do you think will stand up to these powerful interests? Who do you want standing up for you? The answer will never be David Cameron, because he's strong at standing up to the weak, but he's always weak when it comes to standing up to the strong. Whoever is making their case, I will always stand up for you. With me as Prime Minister, no powerful interest will outweigh the interests of the working people of our country. That is my mission as Prime Minister. And giving a future for working people and building the wealth of the future means giving opportunities to all of our young people. What does this government plan to do? It plans to cut investment in education, shortchanging our children and shortchanging our country. That's something this Labour Party will never do. We'll invest in our young people and invest in our future. We'll protect our Sure Start centres, our schools and our colleges. We'll guarantee apprenticeships to every young person who gets the grades, and we'll do something else. We'll make amends for the mistakes of this government, for the betrayal of young people, for Calamity Clegg, and we'll cut tuition fees from £9,000 to £6,000. And it's not just education that needs protecting. We need an NHS with time to care for us all. That's why it's right to ask those who can to pay a little bit more, with a crackdown on tax avoidance, a levy on the tobacco companies, and a mansion tax on the most expensive properties worth over £2 million. It's a properly costed, fully funded plan for 20,000 more nurses, 8,000 more doctors, 5,000 more home care workers, and 3,000 more midwives. That is the rescue plan that our National Health Service needs. And we'll do something else. We'll call time on David Cameron's privatisation of the NHS, with a cap on private profits in our health service. And we will do something else. We will abolish, we will repeal their terrible Health and Social Care Act and put the right values back at the heart of our National Health Service. Now, the importance of this idea that our country only succeeds when working people succeed goes beyond the economy and public services. It shapes our plan for our communities too. Take immigration. I'm the son of immigrants. I stand here today with deep gratitude and love for my parents and what they gave me. And deep gratitude and love for what this country gave us. I know how immigration can benefit our country. But I know also that if working people are to have faith in the system, there have to be controls. Those who come to our shores from abroad should make their contribution to our country before they claim benefits. People should learn English if they work directly with the public in our public services. And we must never allow the wages of working people to be driven down by the gangmasters, the rogue employers, and those who avoid paying the minimum wage, because this Labour Party will always fight exploitation wherever we find it. And changing the old way of running the country means something else, and this is really important for us. It means challenging the way government works. It's about opening up politics so everyone's voice is heard. And it's about giving power back to those to whom it really belongs, the British people, in every single part of our country. More powers for the Scottish Parliament, more powers for the Welsh Assembly, and to the cities, towns and counties of England too. It's time to end a century of centralisation throughout our United Kingdom. So we want to win power in order to give it away and to give new energy to our democracy. It's time to extend the right to vote to 16 and 17-year-olds so young people can have a proper voice in our country. And you know, I'll never cease striving. If I'm Prime Minister, I'll never cease striving for a more equal, more just and more fair society. It's why I joined the Labour Party. Equal rights for all. Whatever your gender, race, ability, faith or sexual orientation, that is the Britain I believe in. That is the Britain we all believe in too. And just as we need change here at home, so too abroad. Let me just say it plainly. I believe in a Britain that looks outwards, not inwards, that works with others in our national interest. That's why for jobs, to tackle problems from terrorism to climate change, and because we're at our best when we're confident in the world, our future lies inside, not outside, the European Union. We will work with our allies for reform, and there does need to be reform, but there is no future for this country withdrawing from the world. And we'll work with our allies too, across the world, to face all the difficult issues we need to in our national interest. You know, I pledged to this party and the country when I became leader, we would learn the lessons of the 2003 Iraq War, and we have. We do not seek to solve the problems of the world on our own, but we will engage with the world. We will continue the fight against ISIS in partnership with our allies in the region and the world, because they are an evil organization that must be defeated. And our plan at home and abroad goes together. A country that works for working people again is a country that will be confident and secure with its place in the world. So this is our plan. And you know, today we follow in the footsteps of those who have built the great institutions of our country. all of them called time on the old way of doing things. In 1945, Attlee called time on the dark days of the Depression, and he said, never again. In 1964, Harold Wilson called time on the fusty old way of doing things, and he beckoned in the white heat of the scientific revolution. In 1997, Tony Blair called time on a decaying public realm, and he said our hospitals, our schools, and our public services could again be the best in the world. I do not offer a government that tries to carry on from where the last Labour government left off. I will lead a government that seeks to solve the challenges of our time. Now, over the last 4.5 years, I've been tested. It's right that I've been tested. Tested for the extraordinary privilege of leading this country. I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm ready to put an end to the tired old idea that as long as we look after the rich and powerful, we'll all be okay. I'm ready to put into practice the truth that it's only when working people succeed that Britain succeeds. If you elect me as Prime Minister in just over 3 weeks' time, I will work for that goal. I will fight for that goal every single day, in everything I do, in every decision I make. I know Britain can be better. The British people know Britain can be better. Together, let's make it happen. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thanks very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, friends. Friends, thank you very much. Right. Well, look, thank you for that very, very kind response. Now, we're going to take some questions. I just want to say something in advance of these questions. I talked earlier about the kind of country we believe in. What's really important also about the country we believe in is we have a press that asks difficult questions. And it's really important that we hear these questions respectfully, because it is who we are as a country. So I'm going to turn to our friends from the... Just for the record, by the way, it wasn't just the media applauding that, what I said there. Right, I'm going to look for James Landale from the BBC. Yeah, James.
Good morning. I hope I live up to that billing. Why should the British people trust Labour on the economy when you won't say precisely what taxes you will raise, what spending you will cut, and when you will clear the deficit?
Let me respond to that directly. We have set out more detail than an opposition party has, I think, at any stage in terms of a general election. Let me just be very, very clear about the proposals we're putting forward. First of all, we've set out tax changes that we want to make. For example, reversing David Cameron's millionaires tax cut. Right? We've been very clear about that. We've set out our plans on tax avoidance. Secondly, I talked about Tony Blair earlier on. Look, I'm going into an election doing what I think no other Labour leader has done, which is saying outside protected areas, the NHS, education, international development, spending is going to fall until the books are balanced. And I'm being very, very clear about that, James, as well as setting out some of the detail of the changes we want to make. So, look, and just on the point about the deficit, look, I couldn't be clearer, and I've, tied us very, very clearly to that in the document that we published today. That we're going to cut the deficit every year, that we're going to have a surplus on the current budget as soon as possible in the next Parliament, and that we're going to have the national debt falling. So I think if you look at the totality of what we're saying, it is more comprehensive, more clear, and if you like, more binding than what any other opposition party has set out. Do come back if you want to.
Are you not beginning this argument 5 years too late?
Well, that's different from the question you just asked. I mean, look, over the...
That's why it was a follow-up question.
That's what they call a second question. Look, let me say this clearly. You know, when I set out on this journey nearly 5 years ago, I said that what we needed to do was to solve the problems we faced in a different way. Because I knew that it wasn't going to be open to the next Labour government to have lots of money to spend. And, you know, some people have asked over the course of these last few years about some of what I've said about the way we reform the economy. And it has all been towards one purpose and one purpose alone, which is to show how change can come even in an era of scarcity. And we haven't just said that over the last 4 years or so, we've carried that through into our manifesto today. I'm going to take Carl Dinnan from ITN, one of the people on our bus.
Thank you. You've put your budget responsibility at the front of this, but you still haven't said when you will balance the current budget. And until you've done that, people will be entitled to think that this is just like the Rovers' return outside, just a front. When will you balance the current budget? Well,
here's the thing, and I said this in the original speech I gave when I unveiled our first pledge on the deficit, Carl, in December. I said that what we learnt from this government is setting an arbitrary timetable wasn't the answer. And I'll tell you why. Because there's nothing that undermines credibility more than setting an arbitrary date without an idea of meeting it and then failing to meet the date. Now, George Osborne has done that many, many times during the course of this Parliament, because, of course, he was saying he was going to get rid of the deficit, and he's failed to do so. But we are giving a very, very clear pledge that it will happen within the next Parliament and as soon as possible within the next Parliament. And let me just come back, but let me just answer it. I think that is the right and the responsibility and the responsible thing to do, because the way you gain fiscal credibility is by setting out promises that you can meet, and we're laying out those promises today.
You say it's clear, but it's not clear if there's no date, because nobody can tell how much you're going to have to cut and how much you're going to have to tax.
Well, it is, I tell you, it is clear, because it is within the lifetime of the next Parliament. Look, I'm standing for election for a 5-year Parliament in this manifesto, and I'm setting out in the manifesto, and that's what you'd expect people to do in a manifesto, and I'm setting out in the manifesto what we're actually going to achieve. And I'm tying myself pretty closely to it, as you can tell from it being at the front of the document and from everything I've said today. I just make one other point to you, and I'll bring other people in. Look, I do want to just focus on where the stakes are now in British politics, because I think something very interesting has happened over the last 3 days. The Conservative Party on Friday unveiled a promise on rail fares, which will cost £1.8 billion. The Conservative Party on Saturday unveiled a promise worth £8 billion. That's on top of a promise worth £10 billion for unfunded tax cuts. Now, by my calculation, that adds up to about 20 billion quid, right? Just that's three of their commitments. 20 billion pounds, and they have no idea where a penny of it is going to be coming from. Literally a penny of it where it's coming from. So look, tomorrow, and I'm sure you'll be asking these questions, well, you may not be because you'll be with us, but anyway, I'm sure other people will be asking these questions. You know, the Conservative Party has got to account for why they are now the irresponsible party in British politics. And, you know, I mean, with no offence to the Green Party, they're making the Green Party look fiscally credible in the approach that they're taking. Right, okay. Now, I think I've got Faisal Islam from Sky News. Yeah.
Yes. By putting fiscal credibility on the front page unconventionally of your manifesto, are you not conceding that the Labour Party has a problem with fiscal credibility, and a problem that is, of course, what you'd expect after having left the largest peacetime deficit in history?
No, come on. Now, remember what I said. Seriously, you know, that is Faisal's job to ask these questions. Let me answer him, let me answer you directly, Faisal. Look, absolutely, there's a challenge for us. Absolutely, there's a challenge for us to show that we're going to be fiscally credible and get the deficit down. I'm being quite open about that. And I'll tell you why. Because I think there are lots of people at home who are thinking to themselves, I like Labour values. I like what Labour is putting forward in this election. I want to know it adds up. And today, the manifesto today is proof of that. It's proof that it does add up, that every penny, all the commitments we make, are paid for and costed. I think that's what the British people want. And there's a wider issue which goes beyond our party. And I just want to say something about it, because it's about promises. Look, one of the things that I've been very conscious of ever since I became leader is we are in a political world where there is more cynicism and skepticism than ever before. Now, I don't blame the voters for that, I blame the politicians for that. And I've always said we've got to under-promise and over-deliver, not over-promise and under-deliver. Now, one of the issues about credibility and promises is where is the money coming from in a time of scarcity? And that's why it's so important what we've done in our manifesto.
Just one follow-up. Does this not, though, mean cuts for Scotland, where you're facing a different battle from the rest of the election?
Well, Ed Bull set this out very well on the radio this morning. Because, look, what's happening in relation to Scotland is we are raising extra resources, across the United Kingdom indeed, for the tax changes that we make. That's the equivalent of around £800 million. Now, what happens to the Scottish budget overall depends on other decisions that we make and what happens in these unprotected areas. But I just want to draw the contrast here. The contrast is this. You've got a Labour Party that says the deficit does need to fall. We're not going to pretend there won't be difficult decisions. On the other hand, you've got two other choices. You've got an extreme plan from the Conservatives. They want to double the cuts next year and have bigger cuts in the next 3 years than in the last 5. And you've also got something that is very important in relation to the SNP. Because what's been exposed about the SNP, and Jim did it last Wednesday in the debate, is they're planning £7.6 billion of cuts because of their fiscal autonomy plan. So ours is the plan for social justice. Ours is the better plan to put an end to Tory austerity in Scotland. I'm going to take Andy Bell. I'm going to take Andy Bell from Channel 5.
Thank you very much. Andy Bell, 5 News, if you really want to be the party of economic credibility, is it now time for you to admit that the last time Labour was in power, you borrowed and spent too much? Are you ready to say that now?
I'm going to say consistently what I've always said, which is that we didn't regulate the banks properly, and that led to the financial crisis. And look, I just really want to say this to you. If you look at the position that we were in before the financial crisis, that the debt was lower than the debt we inherited, for example. Now, here's the thing. The financial crisis then happened. I wish the financial crisis hadn't happened. But the question for the future is who has learnt the lessons of the financial crisis? Who has learnt the lessons in relation to the banks? And then the question for us is, in these changed circumstances, are you going to make decisions which show that you're going to get the deficit down? And the answer is yes.
So Labour didn't spend too much.
I've always said that if you're talking about our investments in health and education and all the other things, absolutely we were right to invest in those things. And our point... And look, I do point out to you that David Cameron was backing our spending plans until the financial crisis. And so all this, so look, the lesson of the financial crisis, they want to say that somehow it was spending that caused the financial crisis. The opposite is true. It was the financial crisis that caused the deficit to go as high as it did, and we've got to get it down. Right. Okay. Gary.
Thank you very much indeed, Gary Gibbon, Channel 4 News. You're making a lot today, obviously, about the lock, the budget responsibility lock, page 1. A lot of people would see it as a Houdini-style lock, one you already know how to unpick. The IFS is saying your rules are deliberately vague and they don't allow us to know whether you're going to make £18 billion worth of cuts or zero. Which is it?
Well, let me answer the second point first, and then I'll come to the Houdini question. On the second point, again, Ed set this out this morning. We are going to have cuts in unprotected areas. We've been clear about that, right? Now, here's the point, and this is what we've got to learn about what's happened over the last 5 years. Why is it that the government has made the cuts, but they haven't cut the deficit as they promised? How do you understand what has actually happened? Well, it's because there are 3 elements to deficit reduction. There's tax, and we've set out the tax changes we're going to make. There's spending, and I've explained to you our approach on spending, but then there's what's happening to the economy and living standards. And look, this is the key part of this argument. which is failing to build an economy that properly works for working people, is not just bad for working people, it's bad for balancing the books. It's because the revenues haven't come in, and that's why they haven't balanced the books. And so the answer, Gary, to the question that you ask is, look, our job will be to do as well as we can in relation to living standards and the economy, because then that minimises the reductions you've got to make in spending. But I'm clear there will be reductions, and we've set that out very clearly until the books are balanced.
You don't deny you're giving yourself wriggle room here, about £18 billion worth of wriggle room.
I don't recognise the way you describe it, and I'll tell you why. Because what people want from us is clear commitments to cut the deficit every year, to not make unfunded commitments, and there's a contrast, as I say, between us and the Tories, who are making these £20 billion of unfunded commitments, and have clear fiscal rules that we're going to keep to. And I do go back to this point. Setting fiscal rules, it is a task where you've got to make sure that those fiscal rules are both credible and can be met. Because there's nothing worse for credibility than rules that can't be met. Now, who else? What a selection. I'm going to take Michael. Yeah.
Hello, Michael Settle from there. There's a poll out today showing the S&P are now at 52%. What can you possibly do to stop this S&P surge? Because what you've been doing thus far clearly hasn't worked.
Well, let's see what happens in the next 4 weeks or so, 3.5 weeks, Michael. But there's three things I think that are important about your question. The first is the general election choice. But the general election choice is a Labour government or a Conservative government. And I think it's very, very important that people in Scotland and elsewhere focus on that choice. Secondly, I'm proud of the offer that we're putting forward to the people in Scotland and indeed of the whole United Kingdom about how we build social justice, whether that's on the minimum wage or 0 hours contracts or a mansion tax for the health service, a whole range of issues. And thirdly, I think there's a really important argument now about actually what the SNP commitments are. Because, you know, look, Nicola Sturgeon wants to come along and say that she's not going to make any cuts at all. And then it turns out she's got a fiscal autonomy plan, which she has doubled down on, which she is now supporting and repeating her support for, which involves precisely that. 7.6 billion of cuts in the IFS, and people right across, you know, authoritative figures from everywhere have confirmed that that's the case. But, you know, let's see what happens on May the 7th in relation to Scotland, because, you know, I believe that there are many, many people still making up their minds. Right, I'm going to take Sam.
Thanks. Sam Lister, Press Association.
Who's also on our bus, by the way.
The IFS has said your plans may have a malign influence on the economy, and obviously you're not keen to set out the date for wiping out the deficit or any details on tax and spending. How are you going to convince voters at home that you are fiscally credible?
I'm sure you're being a trifle unfair to the IFS, because they wouldn't have said something about like that. People have to make their judgment. Let me characterise it this way. Look, there are some parties in this election who are coming along and who are saying, we don't need to make any difficult decisions. There need to be no reductions in spending at all. It's all going to be easy, right? That's not the route we're taking. There are other parties in this election, notably the Conservative Party, and I think UKIP as well, who seem to be supporting them, who are saying, we've got to go even further than we've gone in this Parliament, doubling the cuts next year and all of that. Now, in the Conservative Party's case, I'm not so sure about UKIP, but in the Conservative Party's case, they are not only saying they're going to make these extreme cuts, but then they're also kind of piling on £20 billion worth of unfunded commitments on top of it, which makes it completely, the sum's not adding up. And by the way, the reason this matters, and the reason why our pledge on the public finances matters, is because this ends up being about the family finances of working people. Because, you know, what would the Tory party 20 billion lead to? It would end up leading to very significant cuts in services for working people, or significantly higher taxes for working people, VAT and all of that, exactly what they promised they wouldn't do before the last general election. So what I would say, Sam, to your important question is, look, ours is the sensible plan. Ours is a sensible, balanced plan. And I think actually that's what the British people want. Right, there's a lady at the back. Yep.
Hi, Catherine Boyle from CNBC. I was just wondering, with the targets for raising money from from cracking down on tax avoidance. Just how do you think you're going to get HMRC to get this kind of money? I mean, this is an organisation which has had the HSBC files for however many years and managed to have one potential prosecution. How can you set that level of figure on 7.5 billion on how much more they're going to be able to recover?
It's Catherine's it?
Yeah.
Catherine, I think it's a good and important question. And that's why we announced one of the reasons we announced our review into the customs and practices of HMRC. Because, look, I think there is a widespread recognition that we need to change our approach to tax avoidance and tax evasion. And that is partly about policy, and that is partly about approach. I just meet lots of small and medium-sized businesses who say to me, look, I seem to be chased for every penny by HMRC. Why do they do these deals with these big companies, and indeed sometimes individuals, and let them off the hook? And so it's precisely for that reason that we're doing this. And look, there is going to be a change. With the Labour government, there is going to be a change in the way we approach tax avoidance. You know, we're not going to carry on with a situation where rules that can't be justified, and non-doms is the obvious example, rules that can't be justified are somehow defended because it's said, well, look, you know, I know it's indefensible, which seems to be the Tory position. It's indefensible, but we're going to keep it in place. Look, I don't think that's a good position. I think if the rule's indefensible, it should be got rid of, and that's what we're going to do. And so it is a change in approach that we are looking at. I'm going to take. Are you a journalist, this gentleman? No, you're not a journalist. I'm not going to take you. Sorry. Got the people waving from Newsnight.
The IFS that you so revere, you just said you did, has said that from 2016 it would be coherent and would meet George Osborne's charter for you to do 0 billion of cuts. Do you rule that out right now?
Yes. We've said very clearly there are going to have to be reductions in unprotected areas. And we couldn't have been plainer about that. Look, our objective, Allegra, is to have a surplus on the current budget and to have the national debt falling as soon as possible in the next Parliament. We're absolutely serious about deficit reduction, and we're absolutely serious about making the reductions that I've talked about.
Something slightly different. When you became...
You don't get two questions, I don't
Everybody
think.
else has. When you became leader, you said...
OK, go on then. I'm feeling generous.
When you became
Make it a nice question.
When you became leader, you said you wanted to move on from New Labour. Which of the policies in this manifesto today would not have been in the 97 manifesto? You can do it, go on.
Actually, you could have asked me a better question, which is which of the policies wouldn't have been in the 2010 manifesto, which I wrote. But anyway, unfortunately, you didn't ask that, so I'm not going to answer it. The answer I would say, and I said it in my remarks, is I'm not offering to carry on while the last Labour government left off, partly because circumstances have changed. And if I can put my finger on two things in particular, I think we've learnt so many lessons from the financial crisis. Look, above all, we've learnt a lesson about regulation, about the banks, about what needs to change. But I think we've also learnt a wider lesson about our country and about the way our country works. You know, I think that there is a sense, increasingly among people, that it feels like a country where not just people lead parallel lives, but where there is one rule for one set of people and another rule for another set of people, and we can't carry on with this. And, you know, I think holding vested interests to account, holding powerful interests to account is an incredibly important part of what I stand for, and I think what people want in the next government. And they're certainly not going to get it from David Cameron, but they are going to get it from me. The second point I would make to you, and this is again where circumstances have changed, is that we are dealing, and it goes to your point about the deficit actually, you know, look, we're living in a world which is a very, very different world, and your question was about 97, of the world that Tony Blair and Gordon Brown inherited. And you know, that's why, you know, I get asked these questions about my fiscal position. I'm doing something that Tony Blair and Gordon Brown certainly didn't do in 1997, because I'm going into the election saying they're going to have to be reductions in spending outside key protected areas. So look, I think part of it is about a change in circumstances and about adapting to those changed circumstances, which the Labour Party has already done. And as I've said, I've outlined today my own political project, as I've done over the last 4.5 years. And it's not the same as New Labour's political project, in part because the challenges are different. I'm going to take George Eaton. I think you might be the last question, George.
Thanks. George Eaton, New Statesman. The manifesto promises to protect the principle of media plurality by ensuring that no media outlet can get too big. Could you give any more details on this? Does this mean a cap on media ownership? And also, do you agree with those who say that that pledge, combined with your pledge to implement the Leveson inquiry, explains the degree of media hostility to you?
Okay, I'm glad I called you. Right. On the two parts to your question. Look, on the second part of your question, I think it's incredibly important that we have a free press, right? And I think it's incredibly important that we have a free press that can write what it likes about me, and they certainly have. And you know, that is who we are as a society. I said what I said at the outset, advisedly. You know, that is the job of journalists. You know, and you know, I defend the rights of a free press. Now, we've got to have a press that doesn't treat victims, and that is the point about the Leveson business, that doesn't kind of treat victims in a way which means they have no redress. And that's what Leveson has always been about, and absolutely we are committed to keeping our promise to the victims. On media plurality, you've read the words in the manifesto. Look, it's always been a long-standing position of us throughout this Parliament that we think that there are significant issues that need to be looked at in relation to media plurality, and that's something that the next government will do. I've sort of said it with the last question, didn't I? But I've kind of, you know, such a tempting bunch. The lady at the back.
If I'm from the Zeit in Germany, you
Hi.
mentioned you mentioned that you want to reform the European Union. Can you explain to me why the other European governments should negotiate with you if there's no threat of a referendum? What would you hope to achieve?
Okay, thank you very much for your question. It is important. So this is a big choice at this election. Look, David Cameron wanted us to believe 2 years ago that his strategy of threatening exit would lead to great results for Britain. Now, the fortunate thing about the last 2 years is we've had a good sort of what they call a natural experiment of seeing whether that's true. And he put forward his own sort of case about why Jean-Claude Juncker shouldn't be president of the European Commission. And he said it was going to be a great success and he would gather lots of allies. Well, he lost by 26 votes to 2. Now, why did he lose by 26 votes to 2? It's really important to understand the reasons for this. The problem is that when David Cameron comes knocking at the door of other European leaders, people don't think he's coming to solve the problems of Britain or Europe. They think he's coming to solve the problems of the Conservative Party. Now, you know what? They're right. He is trying to solve the problems of the Conservative Party. And here's the funny thing. Chancellor Merkel wasn't elected to solve the problems of the Conservative Party. She was elected on behalf of the people of Germany. So the reason why we will get far further in the reforms that we want is because engagement within Europe to reform Europe in all of Europe's interests, starting for us with Britain's interests, is absolutely the right way to get reform. Let me just take this issue of immigration. I think there are lots of European leaders around capitals who are thinking, look, we do need to do something about this issue of benefits and access to benefits. But look, David Cameron's sort of kamikaze strategy is kind of a disaster for getting support. Because actually people think, oh my God, if Cameron's supporting it, that is a really good reason not to support it. That has been the lesson of his approach. So actually engagement is what is going to get us success. Now, I'm going to take the last question from Chris Hope.
Chris Hope, Telegraph, not on your bus, but we're willing to come along one day.
You're welcome on the bus anytime, depending on the nature of this question.
It's actually two questions.
Oh, God.
In your manifesto, you make no mention of protecting the green belt. Why is that? And also, will you, in power, stop, or even would you stop the Tory plans to increase the 40% threshold to £50,000?
Okay, let me deal with both of those questions. On the green belt, our position is actually to keep the planning laws as they are, but with one change, and this is very important for Telegraph readers, which is to put brownfield first, and actually to restore the brownfield first principle. And that is the right thing to do. On the second point, Ed Miliband set this out the other day. Look, we want to reduce the number of people paying the 40p tax rate. Absolutely we do, and we want to raise the threshold. But look, here is the big choice that you face at this election. In a way, Chris, you set me up to make this point, which is every promise we make is a promise that we can pay for. And it is what the British people expect. And, you know, for people going to the Conservative Party manifesto tomorrow, they will have to answer the question about where their £20 billion worth of unfunded commitments are coming from. Now, yesterday on the television, George Osborne was asked 18 times about the £8 billion, and he had no answer on 18 separate occasions. And look, the British people do, and look, in a way, I think it's a sign of something about this election. Because I don't think the Conservative Party would necessarily have done this 3 weeks ago. I think it's a sign of desperation and panic. That is what parties do. That is what parties do when they run out of road and they run out of ideas and they start coming up with a whole bunch of commitments without any kind of clue about how they're paying for it. That is where the Conservative Party has got. They didn't unveil it in the budget, this commitment. It wasn't announced in the budget. Suddenly you've got on Friday this rail fares thing when Patrick McLaughlin had said that he'd accused us of committing to this. I mean, get this. He said, imagine, he said, Labour's going to commit to this thing. It's completely bonkers and it's, 5 years, £1.8 billion. And then he committed to it, right? And then similarly on the $8 billion, similarly in relation to the unfunded tax cuts. So look, it is a sign of where we are in this election campaign. Because we're a campaign that has been absolutely consistent about where we stand, about the fact that it was our first pledge unveiled in December, that we were going to show how every promise was paid for. Let me just say a couple of final words to this audience. Look, first of all, I want to thank all of you, not just for being here today, but for your incredible support for me since I became the leader of this party. I'm incredibly proud to be leader of your party. Look, so secondly, let me just say this, because this goes to my politics and this election. It's really great that you're all here today. What's even more great is all of the things you're going to do over the next 3.5 weeks to elect a Labour government. And I'm absolutely deadly serious about this. Look, this election could come down to a few hundred votes in a few dozen constituencies. And the great thing about an election like that is that all of you can be the difference to the outcome of this election. And so look, if you've got any DIY that needs doing between now and May the 7th, I'd put it off till May the 8th. Family weddings, birthday parties, they can all wait. But look, I'm really serious about this. You know how incredibly high the stakes are at this election. You know how incredibly high the stakes are for your communities. You know how incredibly high the stakes are for this country. You know how we can change this country. That's what our manifesto shows today. But as I often say, politics is too important to be left to politicians. Because the reason change has happened throughout our history is because people made it happen. Workers' rights, the NHS, rights for gay and lesbian people. And here's the thing, the Tory party is not just a desperate party in a panic. They're a party that has people that doesn't have people that want to knock on doors for them. Now, I'm not surprised. I wouldn't want to knock on doors for the Tory party either. But that is the difference. That is the difference. They may have the billboards, they may be able to outspend us, but we have the people. And that has been true throughout our history. It's true now. We know our responsibility. Let's change this country. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.